Okay, a few days ago, a short while after the initial story trailer dropped for Avowed, there was a deep dive shown on the Xbox channel with the director of the game of Avowed, and it revealed a number of new things, some very positive things overwhelmingly, and I think overall it was good press for the game, no question. We got to know a new companion, a Hearth Orlin called Yatsli, and she looks really cool and fairly cute as well. And they showed a number of different approaches on how you can acquire items and go about tasks and quests. For example, direct combat in order to get an Adrigan heart, or alternatively a stealth approach using the ability Shadowing Beyond, by the way, lifted directly from Pillars of Eternity, which adds to another point, the fact that if you look at the UI of various abilities, even how you upgrade weapons and cast spells, a lot of this is lifted directly from Pillars of Eternity. So you can see a lot of continuity, and I don't think it's just laziness. I think it's a intentional effort on their part to create that continuity between the original Pillars games, even though they are isometric CRPGs, and this new game, action RPG, Avowed. So I think overall this deep dive was very positive, effective. We also found out, for example, that your character is a godlike, but a godlike of unknown origin. Again, this would probably only appeal to or be interesting to fans of the Pillars of Eternity series, but a godlike without a specific god as a patron, as a progenitor, is a little bit weird, all things considered, and I'm pretty sure this ties into the story, which makes it quite interesting. The only thing that didn't appeal to me were the godlike growths of the particular godlike shown in the deep dive. I'm hoping there are alternative ones or ones that just look better aesthetically. It didn't really appeal to me very much. All of that said, the combat looks janky, and that is kind of to be expected. Obsidian is not known for their amazing combat. It looks serviceable, but I think in terms of fun factor and even efficacy, maybe magic is the best way to go. But it looks fine. It looks absolutely fine. It doesn't need to be amazing necessarily. So yes, overall, very positive impressions. And if you go to the Xbox channel, you can see as of the making of this video, there are 231,000 views of the deep dive. Now that seems on its face to be quite good, but the Xbox channel has well over 5 million subscribers, meaning the ratio of subscribers to people who actually watch the deep dive is pretty poor. And this leads me to my main concern about Avowed. Now obviously it goes without saying, my very first video on this channel was about Pillars and Avowed. I am a relentless supporter of Aurora and the Pillars of Eternity universe. There's no question about that. I want more Pillars, and I certainly want Avowed to succeed. Otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it. But I do have concerns, very obvious ones. The biggest one is A, the marketing, and the other one is B, how it's being marketed. The marketing in general is pretty weak, and it's reflected in the number of views you can see on that deep dive. Contrast that, despite all the dislikes, with the Dragon Age Veilguard reveal, whether it's the very poorly implemented cinematic trailer or the quote-unquote gameplay trailer, and it's just night and day. Now you can argue this is a AA game, and that's very evident from various things shown in the deep dive. For example, all your abilities are drawn from ranger trees, fighter trees, and wizard trees, which is a weird combination. You can also tell based on things like Shadowing Beyond and a few other things that a lot of these abilities were actually lifted from the abilities of other classes in Pillars of Eternity and integrated into the new ability tree system. For example, Shadowing Beyond being a rogue ability, it's now a ranger ability. And it wouldn't surprise me, for example, if barbarian abilities from Pillars of Eternity were lifted and put into the fighter tree, or if druid or cleric abilities are lifted from Pillars of Eternity and put into the wizard tree. It remains to be seen, but I have a pretty strong hunch that's going to be the case. So this is a AA game. It is working with a limited budget. You can tell they tried to cram in as much good stuff as they could with limited funds. Microsoft really was being stingy and cheap with them, which is not Obsidian's fault. But all that said, the marketing for this game is not very good. It's not reaching enough eyes and ears. And because the combat is lackluster, overall, it's not its strongest point, probably the weakest point. Many people are looking at this and thinking, what's the big deal? The combat looks terrible. It kind of looks cartoony, etc., etc. And this is the critical point and concern I have, namely that the game is being marketed not to a broad audience who might be interested in the game, but very specifically to Obsidian fans, and even more specifically to fans of the Pillars of Eternity universe. Because when I see the trailer or the deep dive, or a friend of mine who's also played the game extensively sees this stuff, we think it's amazing. Wow, look, it's an Orlin. Or look at that spell. Oh, Shadowing Beyond, that's taken from the Rogue Tree. The things that we had read about the Living Lands, something that had never been shown before, as well as little tidbits such as the Masked Inquisitor that we see in the trailer actually being the same one you encounter in the Temple of Boudica in the Deadfire Chain in Pillars of Eternity 2. You see lots of this stuff as a fan of the series and think, wow, that's really cool, that's really appealing. But if you take yourself out of yourself, so to speak, and try to just look at the trailers or the deep dive from the perspective of somebody who has no knowledge of the Pillars of Eternity universe and is not well versed in Obsidian games or has not played many Obsidian games, then I think we encounter a rather large problem, potentially. Namely that there isn't much going on there to draw that audience in who's not familiar. Again, I'm of the view that even somebody with passable knowledge of Obsidian games, who's been a fan, who's played a number of their games, will still like this game because it has a very Obsidian-like style. But if you've never touched Obsidian games, what are you meant to think? The combat, like I said, something that always stands out to you as the very first thing in any trailer and any instance of gameplay, is pretty janky and pretty bland, all things considered. Now, it might be different when the game actually comes out and feel different. It doesn't feel particularly weighty, and it just looks serviceable, as I said. Now, the director did mention, for example, that they introduced third person, which was something that a lot of people lamented not being in Avowed. They clearly added this into the game. And this, I've noticed, has drawn more people in. But even those people who've been drawn in due to the introduction of third person seem to be fans of Obsidian games overall. So there's a general marketing concern that the game isn't being marketed enough or sufficiently. And there's a specific concern that, in as much as it is being marketed to people, the people that it's being marketed to are diehard Obsidian fans, and more specifically, Pillars fans who just know the lore in and out and see all kinds of tidbits and interesting things that are being introduced. As I mentioned, for example, a godlike without a specific god. How interesting is that? The mention by the Orlin of the godless, which you can probably guess what those were in light of the history and theology of Eora, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of that for us, but that means, frankly speaking, very little to the person who casually looks at the trailer and just thinks, combat looks mediocre or boring. So somehow Obsidian really needs to step up their game in terms of the marketing and advertise certain RPG systems and other things that are largely independent of Pillars of Eternity. Or if they're not independent, they can appeal to a wider audience that is not contingent upon Obsidian / Pillars of Eternity. Now you have to remember that Outer Worlds, which was in a similar situation, arguably, actually sold pretty well, but Outer Worlds had one strength, one thing going for it that Avowed does not. Perception, real or imagined, that Outer Worlds was in fact Fallout in space. Now it's a bit debatable in hindsight whether that was actually true, but that was the perception, and that certainly fueled a lot of desire to buy the game, which resulted in sales, which resulted in, at the very least, seemingly sufficient satisfaction such that Microsoft has greenlit Outer Worlds 2, presumably with a somewhat bigger budget. And I think ultimately that's what's going on here with Avowed. I think they received a limited budget after having the budget slashed and cut, because let's be honest, the original trailer was a lot more epic, it looked very different, and if Avowed does well, then it will probably be renewed for some kind of second installation or something similar, which is all we can hope for ultimately. We are fans of Avowed, we are fans of Pillars here, as are you in the audience presumably. We want this to succeed, we want this to work. And a final point is we have no idea what the expectations are in terms of sales on the part of Microsoft. We're completely in the dark on that, and it could be that Avowed sells relatively well, but still does not meet the expectations of shareholders, and then is dropped as an IP, or, in the worst case scenario, Obsidian could even get shut down. It's not impossible. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. It'd be much appreciated. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.